Rightio, we have part of the Salmon family here from Poowong, isn't that correct?
That's right. I'm Bruce.
Ken?
No worries. Your family was very well known and loved, I would say, all around my area of South Gippsland because you had the butcher shop in Poowong and you delivered bread and milk to nearly every household in a huge area. Bread and meat.
Meat. That's a shot.
Right, well now, how did this transpire? How come a butcher shop in Poowong? When did that happen?
It goes back to 1812 when Thomas Salmon came out from England. He was a merchant and he was an architect and a carpenter. And he owned part of the boat that he came out on. And he arrived out here and he was going to have a good look around and see if they would settle out here. In the meantime, he brought all these goods. He didn't have the paperwork and he couldn't sell it. The only people he could sell his goods to were the bosses and the policemen, I suppose. So then he had to pack up and go home and take all his goods with him.
That's a bit silly.
Well, I suppose back in those days things happened too. But and then in 1816 he packed the family up and came out here. When he got here, he was allocated 200 acres in Glenorchy and 300 acres a bit further out.
Where's that?
In Tasmania, in Hobart, just out of Hobart. When he sort of set up his farms, they used to give you convicts to look after the farms. He was a bit of a heavy drinker too, and so I think the convicts decided that while he was drunk they could sort of disappear. So after the third one he went back to apply for the fourth one, and the governor at the time said, "Have you got a big white horse? Have you got a cart?" Yes. And he said, "You drink a lot." And he said, "You ran me off the road the other night." And he said, "So no more convicts for you." So then he turned around and he said, "Well, hang on a minute. I'm milking 28 cows and supplying Hobart with fresh milk. So maybe you should consider that. I need help." But anyhow, the governor said, "Sorry, mate, no more convicts for you." So, so then that was their settlement. And then basically he developed the farms, pumped out 11 kids. And one of them was another Thomas, who pumped out a few more kids. And that's when Henry started, and he's the one that started the butcher business. Henry is my father's grandfather.
Did he start this business in Poowong, are you telling me?
No. Henry came across in 1860 to, Woods Point, which was in the gold rush areas, and he eventually ended up in the 1860s in Walhalla, where he ran his butcher shop. He was a pretty community-minded people, which seems to run in the Salmon family. He was on the council. He was chairman of directors of 2 gold companies. He was shareholder of other gold companies as well. So he was quite involved in everything like that.
And probably fairly well off.
Of course, Walhalla fell over in the end, didn't it? They said if he had sold all his shares in the gold companies, we're talking 1870, 80, he would have had £27,000, which would have been a lot of money back in those days.
So he lost it, eh?
Well, he died in 1900. It was a pretty big occasion. They closed the town down for his funeral. So he was a pretty well-respected man up there.
So the old boy conked out, and what happened next?
Well, that was in 1900. In 1913, his son William James ventured down and bought the butcher shop at Poowong, which was a bakery shop. They also had a butcher shop in Beta as well. So that's basically where he started. Good community worker as well.
How many people would have been delivered to? How many different families?
Well, just an estimate. Ked might be able to give you a better. I'd say there'd probably be at least 130 families on the farms, plus all the people in and around Poowong itself.
That's pretty good. Now, when you both left school, I suppose you went into the butcher shop?
No, I went milking cows with Bob Callum. And then a couple of guys from the butcher shop had heart attacks, and two of them left nearly at the same time. So that's when I come back, when I was 17, I think. So I was just looking after farms with Dad. Yeah, I worked on his farms. He had 3-4 farms, I think, only small ones, 100 acres. Used to round up the sheep, shearing. Then I went up in the abattoirs, slaughterman with a bloke, help him out.
Because your dad had the abattoirs, did he?
Yep. And he had 150 sows, and they was pigging all year round. So he had a lot of pigs up there.
So the butcher shop stayed in your family because your dad took over next in Poowong.
That's right. It was left to him in 1948. At the time he sold beer, I think. He had the bakery as well.
Did he used to bake the bread or someone else do it?
A very good baker by the name of Tony Lowndes was the baker. People loved his bread, but unfortunately the times changed and sliced bread came in. It's a big thing, wasn't it, sliced bread? And anyhow, Rack bought all the gear and he'd get us boys, because we were cheap labour, we'd have to go over and slice the bread and wrap it all up. And then eventually he just sold out to Home Pride, or didn't sell out, he bought all his bread off Home Pride bakeries. But the meat, he had the abattoirs, I think, killed a couple of head. Now they kill 500 head. You'll see in the photos, it's just an enormous operation now.
I think your family was still pretty well to do then, because in your book you said that you were one of the few families that had an electric hot water service. What's the go?
Well, I think Ida was spoilt. That's his wife.
Your mum?
My mum. He saved all this money from us boys working for him at weekends, chasing sheep and feeding pigs. And he put that money into electric dishwashers and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, he looked after Mum, but he was fairly well off, put it that way.
Now, Poowong was supposed to actually be a bigger centre than it ended up, wasn't it?
Well, originally the Shire was going to be centred in Poowong, but because of the hill between Poowong and Nyora and the railway line decided that, okay, Currumbara would be the centre. So instead of the growth in Poowong, it went to Currumbara.
But that makes Poowong to be a kind of laid-back town, I think, doesn't it? Pretty happy place to grow up.
It was. It was great because everybody knew everybody and everybody knew their whole family. These days, you don't know your neighbour. We had football, cricket, we had everything there.
And you had Francie Masterson.
Yes, Francie, she was great. I went down with the meat van one day and we were playing Halora Shreds. She was one-eyed Halora Shreds. So I drove down the track because we was playing then in the grand final, I think. She had a few kids and they was lined up on the track where I got to go through with their streamers and all thing. They sing the Halora song and that was really good. Oh, I enjoyed it. And another time was a bloke from Joe Latini on the Warrigal Road. And we used to deliver meat and bread at his mailbox, but he rang up and he said, the birds are getting it, so can you put it on the table at home? So I go down there and he had a heap of peacocks. And next thing, I went inside, and when I come outside, they attacked me. So I climbed up a little tree, and they were that rowdy. Joe took about 10 minutes to come up from somewhere with his horse and sledge those days. As soon as he come near it, the bird stopped. And that was it. And he was laughing.
Well, he continued to use his horse and sledge. He never got a vehicle, and he didn't have a telly or anything. He loved the old ways.
Yeah, he was always on the horse, and he loved it. But no tractor, no cars.
You know exactly where I grew up, out at Mountain View there. We were pretty isolated as I look back now. We didn't seem to suffer by it at all because my brothers and I, we all just got up to ferreting and all sorts of stuff. But you lot in town had a pretty enviable social scene going on. You would have had friends galore, wouldn't you?
Well, we certainly had a lot of friends, but nowhere near the number that you'd have in Carraborough. But a lot of our spare time was taken up by our father. He had 4 sons and he wanted to save his labour costs. So on weekends he'd be moving sheep from one farm to another farm. So instead of hiring trucks to transport it, he had 4 sons to chase the sheep along the road. So that was it. Another time I can remember he had us one Sunday working up in the paddock with the sheep, rounding them up, and he had these really good dogs. They were really well trained. But this Sunday the dog just didn't want to do anything. And unfortunately Rack's language wasn't the best.
Rack being your father.
Father, yes, Arthur. So anyhow, we ended up getting it done, and Rack swore a lot at the dog. That afternoon I went over to visit my mate Jeff Gascoigne, and his mother said to me, "Did Rack have a few problems with the sheep this morning?" And I said, "How did you know?" She said, "There was a northerly wind blowing, and the whole town heard all of his language." So, yeah, so that was another experience. But it was great in the fact that we all sort of played team sports. We didn't have little computers and phones back then, and we made our own fun, and it was generally involved with other kids. So
There weren't too many people around with vehicles, cars.
yeah, the cars. Well, there was no automatics. There was no indicators. You know, I can remember Dad driving along. You do a right-hand turn, you stuck your hand out the window. To do stop, you bend your elbow. You know. So, and I remember he used to go along the properties chasing the sheep, and he'd drive over the hills. Some of the hills around Poowong pretty steep. He'd put it in first gear, and if he couldn't get up the hill in first gear, he put it in reverse because reverse had a better ratio, and he'd reverse up the hill. So, yeah, but they were the good old days. The good old days. I went and worked in the city after school, did a trip around Australia, and then I came back and got a job in the butter factory. A couple of little stories about the butter factory. We had a couple of really good guys there, Dudley Trees, that one day went out to the McNally farm.
On the rounds, on the milk truck.
On the tanker. Hooked up to the tank, emptied the milk, got to unhook the hose and pulled the vat out through the shed door.
And lost the whole vat full of milk.
Well, the milk, fortunately, was in the tanker, so he didn't spill his milk, but yeah. Another incident, we had a legend back there at the factory, Jack Hancock, and I think you've done a story on him before. I remember.
Yes, I remember Jack Hancock.
Yeah, he was a bit of a legend in Poowong, and he played jokes on everybody, but it was good to be able to play a joke on him. And another tanker driver, myself, chased him home one night after the milk run, and he had an unregistered Vanguard ute which got halfway home and blew up. And
Well, hang on, we chased him. How do you mean? You weren't running after him waving your arms around?
Sorry, yeah, no, we put a flashing yellow light on top of the vehicle we were driving, who Jack thought it was a policeman, and so he exited very quickly. Got halfway home, the motor blew up. The next thing, Jack's out of the ute, jumped the fence and took off. So never to be seen.
You'd remember Jack Hancock well from the years when you ran the pub in Poowong, because you did that for a long time. You were a very popular publican.
Yeah, about 5 years we were in there and had some good times there. They used to like to drink pretty heavy, everybody. Had a good time. And if they was drunk, I used to drive everybody home. As first I went was one thaggy, because they were the meat workers. But I used to drive everybody home. Keep their business, I suppose.
Of course, Ken was a non-drinker, you see.
That was pretty good of you to do that, though.
Everybody. Yeah, they reckoned I was all right. So they kept coming back. So I was happy.
Well, now, your dad, known as Rack, why is he known as Rack?
It's a long story where there was a song called Rackety Rack Cancun when he was a little nipper. And his father used to entertain his friends. He'd have Rack sing the song, Rackety Rack Cancun. And so he was nicknamed Rack, and that was his name for the rest of his life.
Okay. Yeah. Right, now, Rack was a pretty good community man, wasn't he? I mean, he was very well liked and respected, and he did a lot for the community down there in Poowong, didn't he?
He certainly did. He was a live member of the footy club, played in 3 premierships. He was treasurer for many years. He's one of the original members of the Lang Lang Golf Club. He was treasurer for many, many years, helped develop the club. He was on the school council. He wasn't on the council himself, but he took a big interest in the council affairs. If it wasn't favourable for Poowong, Rack would write a letter to his mate Brian Blake of the local paper, and it would be printed.
He was a good bloke, Brian Blake.
Excellent. Brian gave the eulogy at his funeral, probably the best eulogy I've ever heard. When Rack left Poowong, he wrote a story about Rack. They were good mates. They'd argue, and then they'd go to the pub and have a beer.
Your dad also donated the land for the swimming pool, didn't he?
He donated the land for the swimming pool, was involved in the original starting up of the pool, did a lot of work for it. Yeah, he was a good community man, and all about Poowong. Poowong was his life, really, yes. Rack used to deliver all the sheepskins and cattle pins to Melbourne. He'd load up his ute and his trailer and off he'd go to Melbourne. Once he'd unloaded all that, he'd head off to Newmarket sale yards. He'd often buy some sheep or some pigs and bring them back. One day he bought a sow and a few little piglets, had them in the trailer, was heading back from Flemington, got to the St Kilda Junction, which back then was a very, very busy place. It had 5 or 6 streets coming into one. As he approached it, the back gate of his trailer happened to come loose. The next thing, he's going through the junction, and the mother sow happened to jump out of the car. The end of the story, I really don't know how he got it back in, but I'd imagine there would have been a lot of traffic jams. There would have been a lot of people laughing and carrying and pointing their finger at Rack and saying, "Look at this silly old man." Yeah.
Well, I can't imagine how to get a runaway sow in the middle of St Kilda Junction.
I don't either. I think, well, we'll never know, will we? Because he's passed away.
Yeah. Well, but she got home.
Eventually got home, yes. So there must have been, I don't know whether he's sort of, a pig's pretty heavy animal, isn't it? But anyhow, he eventually got it home. Yeah.
And he took a dog to the Melbourne show. He took a dog to Melbourne in the boot. He forgot it in the boot.
He was an SB bookie at Poowong for a fair while, and he also did some pencilling work for a guy by the name of Mac Gamble, who was a bookmaker, and he'd go to Melbourne. He had his dogs, and he'd always put the dogs in the boot whenever he was travelling. This day he'd been out working his dog before he went down to the Flemington racecourse. He got to the Flemington racecourse and he heard this noise in the boot. "Oh no," he said, "I've still got my dog in there." It was a hot day. So he ended up putting the dog in the car, and I don't know how many trips he did from inside the racecourses with water and just to make sure he was okay. So I don't think that ever happened again.
When I took over from the meat run, I used to go pretty hard and come back one day and Matt said, "You're going too fast. You got to slow down and have more cups of teas." Because I never used to stop. I only used to stop at one place, Dot Arches, East Poowong Exchange. She had the exchange there, and I used to spend bloody hour there.
Well, she would have known everything that went on.
Oh yeah. We used to use the phone too, all the plug-in ones.
Well, that's what they call the party line, isn't it?
It was a party line, all right.
Mac Leserve was notorious for having a cup of tea with everyone on the way, wasn't he?
Yeah. So I ended up, one run he used to do in the morning, I used to do 2 runs in the morning. and he didn't like that. So he had a word with me, but I still kept going. Then he retired after that, I think.
Going back to when I was probably only 4 or 5, there was a young cousin, Billy Clink, and we must have been community-minded at the time too, because they had this big gymkhana and there was a lot of waste, there's a lot of paper, scraps and everything. So Billy and I decided we'd go down and clean up all this paper and burn it. The only problem was that we put all the paper underneath the big cypress hedge, which went around the ground. The other mistake I made was I stole 2 bob out of my mother's purse and went and bought some matches. So we lit the fire.
Bought some matches from
the milk bar, Mrs. Richards. And the only problem, as I said, we went down and set fire, but the hedge, we should have put the paper underneath the hedge. So the next thing, the fire brigade's shooting down, so we thought we'd better exit. So I'll never forget, I went home and Mum was sitting down with a view of all this smoke. And I said to Mum, I said, where's that smoke coming from? But in the meantime, Mrs. Richards had seen the smoke also, put 2 and 2 together and worked out that Bruce bought some matches and now there's a fire. So obviously Bruce has set the fire. So Mum knew that I'd done it and she had this big leather strap. She didn't say a word, she just belted me. So that was, yeah.
Did it make much of a mess of the hedge?
The hedge didn't grow for, well, it was only 2 trees. The fire brigade did a good job, but they put it out. There was only 2 trees that were burnt. But I can remember those dead trees were there for many, many years. Yeah, yeah, it stood out a bit.
Well, the Poowong Fire Brigade still goes, doesn't it?
The Poowong Fire Brigade, yes. The fire brigade was a bit of a legend back then, wasn't it? You know, I can remember Brian Fitzpatrick was in charge. He was the publican at Poowong. And there'd be a fire. There'd be the siren go at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and Brian had set the siren off, so everybody in town would follow him. A few times he got halfway there and they said, oh, the other fire brigade said, don't worry. But he said, I've got all these people out of bed, so he just kept going. So we'd drive down to Nyora or wherever, just because of the fact that we had to get out of bed.
And were you lot in the fire brigade?
Not now, but I was. I did 25 years service. We used to have a meeting once a month in the fire shed, and we all take half a dozen stubbies, and they got a new president, new secretary, and we carried these stubbies in, and they said, you can't have stubbies. So we all walked out and never went back.
Oh.
Actually, I was never invited to participate in the fire brigade. I probably went back to the day I set fire to the hedge. Who knows?
Well, there's one story, we had a fire, and it was at the other side of Nyora on McDonald's track. Nyora had a dam the railway lines used to use up in the hills. So we go down there, and Des Rogers, he was a plumber at Poowong at the time, and we go around a real sharp corner. Next thing, he was holding the ladder, and the ladder flew around off it was still on the truck, but it flew around, and he was still hanging on to it. And I think Lenny Sellings was driving the truck, and he couldn't hear us to stop, and he's swinging around. Next thing, the ladder come back around to us, and we grabbed him. And we went down to the fire, and there was no fire there. Yeah. So that was good. Good laugh, that one.
Now, what about Sam Hatch? You know, you can't think about Poowong in those times without thinking about Sam Hatch.
Sam Hatch was a legend, a good footballer, good bloke and a good community man. I remember when I was about 16, he used to garden a lot of hay, and he'd have gentlemen coming from all around the place working for him. And on a Sunday, they'd never work on a Sunday. So Sam and the boys would have a card game. So I've walked in 16 years of age and thought I was pretty good at the card game. They cleaned me out. I owed Sam about £15. And I said, well, I haven't got it, Sam. Sam said, you're going to be working for me the next few weeks, aren't you? I wasn't very well built, and I had to cart hay, and it was a very hard job, I can assure you.
A few weeks, eh?
Yes, he was, yeah, but he did a lot, and Yeah, him and Kitty were really, really top-line people.
He had tip trucks. He started a garage, and I bought a car from Carnbarra. I thought I'll get him to service it. He opened the bonnet, doing something in the bonnet, hit his hand on his finger, so he grabbed the bloody spanner and threw it through his window of the garage. And I never went back again. Yeah, no, that was about it. Yeah, old Sam, he was a great bloke. Yeah.
Now, what about Finley Luke? You also can't think of Poowong and not think of Finley Luke, because he's got a kilt and everything he does, doesn't he?
I don't know. Never seen him in it.
No, for important occasions, because he's a head honcho. He's head of the clan.
Finley was another Poowong identity. He came from England. He worked at the factory part-time. He worked for Gough Mountain in the timber yard, and he was a carpenter. So he did a lot of work. He eventually took over the carpentry business and the shop, and him and Florence, wasn't it? Once again, another Poowong man that helped out with whatever was going in the town.
They had that little hardware shop up there for yonks, didn't they? That was pretty handy, because Poowong used to be a very thriving town once, but it's a bit of a one-horse town now, isn't it?
Not even a milk bar now. There's not much there.
I could remember back then there was 3 milk bars, there was the post office, we had a newsagents, we had a butcher shop, we had a pub, we had sale yards next door to the pub.
Clothing right at the corner. Remember that?
Yeah, there was clothing. Bomb
Could get any clothes or anything, shoes or anything there. That's a long time ago.
Mick Butterworth had a small goods there at one stage, butchery.
When Rack had the shop, he sold the abattoirs to the Preston brothers in Carraburra. He rented the shop out to the Preston brothers. I don't know how long they were in there for, but there's somebody came in that was making sausages and all that, so I assume that would have been him.
Yeah.
And now the shop is a beauty salon. There was an accountant worked in it for a while, yeah.
Now, the sale yards in Poowong, now, how long ago was that? When you were a kid, wasn't it?
I can remember basically when the sale yards was next to the hotel. That closed down, and then they opened up a new sale yards around in Brisbane Street. And then that closed down, and now it's just residential development. But getting back to Poowong, I remember when I was a little whippersnapper, and Muir Lappin, the doctor from Carramburra,
he delivered me.
Yeah, well, he delivered me too. I think he delivered everybody in here.
He delivered me too.
Yeah. But he used to come out to Poowong on a Friday. They'd hold a clinic out there, Friday mornings in the hall, one of the rooms in the hall.
Oh,
yeah.
In the hall. That's pretty good. He was a good man, I reckon.
Well, he had to be, didn't he? He had all us people to look after. That was the thing about Carramburra, wasn't it? Hospital, doctors, dentists. We had none of them out at Poowong.
No.
Yeah.
And now Poowong was famous for its Poowong dances too, because the other closest dance was way down at Longwarry.
Yes, it goes back. The hall was a meeting place, wasn't it? And not only did it have dances, it also used to have a Friday night was always film night. There was a section up above the entrance where it was actually a film projector at the works. So every Friday night was pictures. Every Tuesday night was table tennis. Every Thursday night was badminton. Yeah, there was a lot of activities went on in that Poowong hall.
And all you lot had to do was simply walk to it, isn't that right? Not like us, stuck out in the middle of nowhere.
About 100 yards we had to walk.
Well, that was a bit of a disadvantage too, because all our friends who lived out of town had cars to get the girls, and they'd go and do their kissing cuddling in the cars, and we didn't have a car to do it in.
Well, you couldn't do it under the hedge because you burnt the damn thing down.
I'll pay that one.
And that film, Kenny, about toilets. Yeah. That premiered in Poowong. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I didn't go to it, but they had a crowd there.
And the sign that was up, unfortunately, for only 24 hours recently, Poo Right for Stomach Awareness Week or something.
The publicity they got out of that was phenomenal. I had friends from New South Wales, because it was on national TV. Poo Right, you know?
I reckon that sign should still be there.
Yeah, yes.
All right, well, that's pretty good. Thanks for your yarns about Poowong and setting us a bit straight on Poowong in the map.
Thank you,
Yep,
Christine.
thank you.